Good morning. So when I first started my company in the late 90s, I spent about 6 months trying to get business, going out there, trying to sell, and nothing really happened. I think I brought in $20,000 within the first 6 months. And then I got this big break, and it was a large financial services firm that was going through a change. They had 13% turnover. They had less than 50% of the people were doing performance review, which means that less than half the people, less than half of the employees in the organization were sitting down with their managers to figure out where they were in the organization, where they were going. And they had tried to change this for 2 years, right? And they were unable to change it for 2 years. They had spent literally millions of dollars on competency models, on new performance reviews, on consulting firms. And they came to me and they said, "This is the problem, and what do you think?" And this was my big break. I mean, this is the thing that would, if this were successful, this would put my company on the map, right? If it weren't successful, then I would teeter along and either succeed or fail over time, who knows. I guess that's what we all do anyway. But I sat there and I listened to them, and I reminded myself in retrospect of this bumper sticker that I remember seeing, which said, "Hire a teenager while he still knows everything." Right? And it was this sense of like, okay, I got this. I can understand this. I know exactly what the problem is. I know exactly why it's not working. And I'm going to solve this problem for them. We started out with a pilot. And in the pilot, we had 250 people in the pilot. If this were going to go to the main rollout of the program, it was going to be 2,000 people globally. Right? So for pilot, I hired a bunch of consultants and trainers. I came up with the plan. I investigated a lot of different possibilities and issues. I talked to a lot of people. We ran the pilot, and it went really, really well. Right? Everybody was really happy for it. We learned a tremendous amount. We collected a tremendous amount of data. And then we went into full rollout mode. Now in full rollout mode, I needed to get this right. Right? I'd hired 100 people to work for me. I was leading this change. I was the leader. I was supposed to have answers. So I created these documents. I mean, I remember still they were beautiful. It was beautiful documents. You would have loved them. Right? It was color-coded. There were, very specific questions and answers. I had pages and pages and pages of FAQs, right? Frequently asked questions. So for every question that we had, I had a really, really great answer. I brought in everybody, I trained them, I figured out the design of the rollout itself. The design of the rollout was that we would break 2,000 people into 100-person groups. I would take consultants and coaches and trainers and match 2 people against every single 100, every 100-person group. I would stagger the rollout so that every 2 weeks, another 100 people started to go through the program. I really had an answer for everything, and I'd figured it out. So, pretty deliverables, centralized control, answers for everything. These are all really, really good warning signs that everything's going to crash, right? And it did. I know usually I'm supposed to come up with my epic fail moment somewhere at minute 8 of a TED Talk, but my epic fail happened really actually soon. Everything started to fall apart. The first 100 people came in, and by the way, the pilot was all based in New York. The rollout was global. The first 100 people came in, and they happened to be night workers, right? They happened to work at night, but our trainings were scheduled in a centralized way so that everything was happening in the day. So already they were unhappy. The coaches were having trouble, the trainers were having trouble, the client was upset, and then we had another 100 people come in 2 weeks later, and then 2 weeks later another 100 people, and then 2 weeks later another 100 people, and literally everything was falling apart. I remember this moment really clearly. I was in a town car. I had been staying at the client till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and then taking a car home and then coming back. I was living in Princeton, New Jersey at the time. The main rollout was in New York City. And I remember taking this car home and thinking, I have completely screwed up my main opportunity. Like, this was my chance. I really thought I had this figured out. I mean, the schedules were so clear in my mind. And I went back to my apartment in Princeton and I shut the shades. And I didn't emerge for 3 days. I just shut the shades. And the first day, I sat there and just berated myself. I cried. Okay, we'll just put that out there. And I berated myself. And I sat there and I was thinking, like, I'm an idiot. Like, I had this. Like, I had this and I squandered it. Right? And so that was my first day. That was fun. The second day, I started to question everything, right? I started to ask every single question. I didn't take anything for granted. I started to deconstruct everything that I knew. I had worked in other consulting firms for 4, 5, 6 years. I had an MBA. I had all this knowledge, all this content, and I started to question absolutely everything. Why are we doing that? Why is this not working? Where did this come from? And there's something I kept coming against. I kept coming back to this change curve, right? This is the change curve if you haven't seen it before. These are the emotions that we go through when we have change, right? And these emotions start in shock, numbness, and denial, and they plummet from there, right? It goes down from there into depression, and eventually understanding, acceptance, moving on. Now, this is morale and competence is on the left there, and time is on the right. This is the process. Every single change management process that anyone ever does in an organization that I had seen up to that point is based on this change curve. And the idea is you have to move people through these stages. If you're a leader, and I was the leader, right? This was my project. I was responsible for it. I'm the leader. I have to move people through this change curve. That was the idea. And this change curve, here's a simple one. If you go to the internet, you put on change curve, you'll see these all over. This is a simple one: denial, resistance, exploration, commitment. This is one, I love this. This is one for overseas assignments. You know, if you look at it carefully, there's nothing good about an overseas assignment, right? I mean, you start in anxiety and apprehension, you go down to depression. When you go up, you're at anger and criticism and reassessment. And finally, months later, you emerge way lower than you started, right, in anxiety and depression, right? I don't know why anyone would do an overseas assignment if they look at these things. This, I love this one too. This is the one for positive change. You've just gotten married. You have a baby, right? You go from uninformed optimism, right? You have no idea what it's like to have a baby, but you're just really excited about it, to realizing what it's like, right? And then you're into informed pessimism when you either check out overtly or covertly, and then hopeful realism. You never end up on these change curves, by the way, any higher than you started, right? It makes me wonder why you would go through any change in the first place. So I started to question, I don't understand this thing. Why is everything, where does this come from? I was asking that question, where does this come from? It's a great question to ask if you want to innovate, right? Where did this come from? And I found the original change curve. This is the original change curve, right? It starts in normal functioning, and eventually you return to normal life, right? Meaningful life. Shock and denial, anger, frustration, depression. Does this look familiar? Right? It looks like everything that we've seen. So where does this come from? It comes from the book On Death and Dying, written in 1969, right, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So what she did was document, in a really intelligent way, the emotions that you go through when you find out you're about to die. Right? You've gotten cancer, or someone you love has a terminal illness, and these are the emotions. So it's a great book, and it's very, very informative. But this is now the research that we're using to guide every single change that's happening in organizations today. And the question I was asking is, wait, there's something different about dying and like talking to employees. Right? There's something different about that, right? And so I started to look, and I realized, here's the thing about change on death and dying, which is that you have no control. You're in a place where you have no control. And if you have no control, if you're facing the worst possible change that you can imagine in your existence, one we're all going to have to go through, but still it's the worst, most depressing, most anxiety-producing thing, then yeah, I think I would go through those stages. But to talk to employees, I don't think you need to. And the question is, why is it that we go through this tumult, this big dip? It's because we lose control. So I started to think to myself, well, what if we didn't have to lose control? Right? What do you do to skip this dip? And I began to rethink. Again, I'm still rethinking. What do I know about change? And I decide, okay, there's 3 things. I come to 3 things you need in order to change. If I'm going to lead people and I want them to do something, they need 3 things. They need capability, they need persistence, and they need ownership. Those are the 3 things. We are great at giving people capability. We teach them things, we make sure they know how to do them, we make sure that it's clear why they should do them, and then we tell them to go do them, and then we're surprised when they don't. And we're surprised when they don't because we think if someone has the capability to do something and we ask them to, they should do it, right? And if you're a parent, you know that's just not true, right? I tell my kids to do things all the time, they don't do them. So the most important one of these is ownership. This is, by the way, what capability without ownership looks like, right? That's capability without ownership. So what you really need is to teach ownership. What you really need is for people to get ownership. That's what you need if you want to lead people. And the way you get ownership is not by getting things right. The way you get ownership from other people is by getting things half right. It's the opposite. Everything I was doing to lead in a way I thought, I'm a leader, I'm powerful, what I need to do is provide answers to people. That's what they're looking for leaders. Strong leaders know the direction that they're going to move in, and they have to tell people the direction to move in, and that's what people respect. The reality is that's not true. The reality is what people look for from really strong leaders is an opening so that they can then step into their own leadership. That what really strong leaders do is that they build leaders around them. And the way you build leaders around them is by not having the answers, is by having the questions, by letting go of control and letting them have control. So I realized all this on day 2. And then on day 3, I had to sum up the courage to actually reach out to the client again, because the client has been leaving me phone calls, and the project was kind of going on, but I was completely absent. They didn't know what happened to me. Right? On death and dying is what they probably thought. And so I went back to the client and I started to renegotiate. And I said, look, I know the goal was 100% performance reviews. That's great. Why? I asked them this question, why? It's the same question as where does this come from? Why do you want that? Well, we want that because it's important. Well, great. Why? Well, it's important because employees need to talk to their managers. Great. Why? Well, because they're leaving, the employees are leaving, and we don't want them to leave. Great. Why are they leaving? Well, they're leaving because they don't know where they stand in the organization, where they're going. And the people they are having that conversation with are the headhunters. And the headhunters are very happy to have that conversation with them, and they're very good at giving them that conversation. So I said, okay, so what we really need is for employees and managers to talk about where they are and where they're going. Are you willing to give everything else up? And they said, if those conversations happen, yes, we're willing to give that up. I said, great. So then the question is, how do you get there? And what I did is I asked the organization, I asked the leaders in the organization to bring me in a room the top 25 resistors, the people who had not done performance reviews in more than 2 years, the people who were most vocal against the idea of talking to their employees, right? So they put them in a room with me. I had 25 people. And I went through and I gave the same talk that I had always given about the importance of this and why we were doing it and what it looked like and what we expected of them. And then I paused after the spiel. And then I said, this is my favorite question as a leader to bring in other people's ownership. I said, why won't this work? Why won't this work? And there was silence in the room. And my answer to the silence was, guys, you haven't, I know you think this won't work because you haven't been doing it for 2 years. You're in this room because you're not doing performance reviews. So I know you think this is ridiculous. I know you think this won't work. I just want to know why. And so the first person raised his hand. He was a partner managing director, right? That's the senior most person that was in the room in this organization. And he goes, here's why I'm not going to do a performance review. I'm not going to do a performance review because I get 80 reviews. People give me 80 reviews because it's a 360 system, right? So if you're an employee, you're going to get reviewed by your manager, your colleagues, your employees. And everybody wants my perspective on things because I'm a senior guy. So everyone gives, I have 80 reviews. I'm not going to do 80 reviews. That's ridiculous. So I don't do my reviews. And there was silence. And in my previous hire a teenager when he still knows everything, my response would have been to explain to him why it was important to do a review and here's how we can make it efficient for him, et cetera. But in the reality from where I was, from the humility of leading something, knowing it wasn't going well and knowing that I don't have the answers, I said, you're right. You're right, because you know why? Because he was right. Because if you were a senior person and you had a lot of work to do and you had 80 reviews to do, you wouldn't do them. So he's right. And he's also right because he sees that as the obstacle, and he's the one who has to make it happen. But then I asked him another question. I said, in those 80 reviews, is there anyone that you have something useful to say about? Right? Is there anyone in those 80 reviews that you think actually it could be meaningful for you to give them some feedback? And he said, yeah, there's probably more than one. I said, how many? He said, at least 8. I said, great. Could you do 8 reviews and just ignore the rest? Senior guy in the organization, he looks at me and he goes, can I do that? I said, look, you're not doing any of them anyway, so obviously you could do that, right? That's not a problem, right? So I'm just telling you to do the ones you know. So, and the conversations went like that. Someone else said, that's not my problem. My problem is, it asks me to give meaningful information and comments on 20 different competencies for each person. That's ridiculous. And I said, I agree, I think that's ridiculous. What do you think you can do? Like, what makes sense to you? I think I could give 2 or 3, comments for each person. Great. Another senior person. Really, I could do that? Yeah, you could do that. It's up to you. So we went on like that. My favorite conversation was one guy who said, my manager never gave me a review. Why should I do one? Right? I said, that's great. How do you feel about your manager? He goes, I think my manager is kind of a jerk. I was like, what do you want your employees saying about you? It's your decision. I'm not going to make anyone in the room do this. You just have to decide. As soon as I'm not going to make them do it, they're going to want to do it. People don't resist change. They resist being changed. If you're in a position to change someone, they will fight you. But they don't resist change. We change all the time. We make decisions to get married and have babies and change jobs and move countries, and we change all the time. We don't resist it. But if you want to change me, forget it. I'm not going to change, right? That brings me down into that curve. I'm no longer in control. So great leadership is about questions. It's not about answers. Great leadership is about vulnerability and humility and knowing you don't have the answers and getting things half right. First of all, the organization, within 6 months, there was a 95% of reviews being completed. Turnover went down to 3%, and it's been sustained for 15 years. And it's purely they who did it. Just to test this, I tried this on my daughter who wanted dessert one day. And I said no, and she goes, I really want dessert. And I said, okay, you can have grapes or a banana. And she said, I want ice cream. I said, that wasn't one of the choices, grapes or banana, ice cream. That wasn't one of the choices. We went back and forth for an unbelievable amount of time. And then finally she looked at me and she goes, okay, I'll have an apple. And I almost said, no! I said grapes or banana. But I actually managed to get over myself to say, okay, yeah, you can have, if you want, you can have that, you win. And she got the biggest smile. What did I care about? I cared that she would eat healthy and be happy about it. What did she get? From her own ownership of it, she was happy and she was eating healthy, right? That's the power of questions. That's the power of questions. Thank you very much.